On today's episode, we have an in-depth, unbiased, long-term review on the NK180 and NK180 Pro kayak motors from Newport Vessels, where we talk about it all, including the good and the bad. We also have some hints at some new gear coming from Humminbird, and we talk about building confidence with glide baits. All that and more on this episode of Tackle Talk.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Dance, and you're listening to Tackle Talk.
Welcome to the Tackle Talk Podcast, brought to you by American Legacy Fishing and Outdoors. World-class fishing gear, unmatched personal service. Now, here's your host, Andrew Hayes.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Tackle Talk Podcast. As always, we are brought to you by the fine folks over at American Legacy Fishing and Outdoors. And right now, they still have their Halloween sale going on where you can get 25% off all Dobbins rods, 25% off all Fenwick rods, and 25% off the internet's best selection of high-quality used fishing gear. All of that at AmericanLegacyFishing.com. All you have to do is use code PUMPKIN25 at checkout on any qualifying Dobbins, Fenwick, or used gear. It will save you 25% off at checkout. Everything else, you can use code TACKLETALK10. That will save you 10% on almost everything else on the website. They have a huge selection of brand new and lightly used fishing gear from Abu Garcia, Shimano, Dobbins, Daiwa, St. Croix, G. Loomis, all of your favorite brands of rods and reels. They also have a great bait selection from Jackal to Berkeley to Strike King to everything in between. All of that over at www.americanlegacyfishing.com. But as always, use code TACKLETALK10 unless you're buying Dobbins, Fenwick, or used gear at the moment. Then you're going to want to use code PUMPKIN25. Again, over at www.americanlegacyfishing.com. All right, everybody, the first thing we're going to hit really fast on today's episode is if you're listening to this right now on Tuesday, the day that this episode comes out, then the Major League Fishing General Tires Team Series is wrapping up down in Texas. That is an event that ran from last Thursday through today, Tuesday, October 29th, and this is another one of those cool two-man team events toward the end of the season. And in this one, your teams are going to be Wesley Strader and Brent Chapman on the Knighton team. You have Justin Lucas and Brent Ayler teaming up for the 7 Brew Coffee team. Michael Neal and Andy Morgan are Team Redcon 1. Gerald Sporer and Jason Elam are on the United States Air Force team. Alton Jones Jr. and Ott Defoe are on the Builders First Source team. The Ferguson team this time is made up of Randy Howell and Nick LeBrun. Evers and Justin Lucas team up for Team Kubota, and Luke Clausen and Martin Villa are the 2 members of the Smoky Mountain Herbal Snuff and Pouches team. So all 8 of these teams have team sponsors, obviously, that were sold by Major League Fishing, similar to all the other team series events. So you get some, I guess we'll say, like unique odd team names for sure, but it's more fishing. You have to have sponsors. I get it. That's just how it goes. So if you're interested in seeing who wins this event, you're going to want to head over to MajorLeagueFishing.com where you can watch all of the live coverage for free for today, Tuesday, October 29th, which, as long as there's no delays here in these last couple of days, will be the finals. Okay, the next thing that we have coming up here on today's show is we'll call it a small teaser for those of you that are avid Humminbird electronics users. Now, I've known some behind-the-scenes details on this for a few months now, but like we've said on past shows, we're not here to spoil things for companies. It's their product, it's their hard work, it's their right, I think anyway, to announce their products to the public without someone like, me or someone that's got loose lips coming in and just spoiling everything. But with that being said, once there are public clues or cues that are out there in the fishing atmosphere, those pieces at least are fair game to talk about. So no giant spoilers here today, but something to kind of wet your whistle a little bit. So if you go to the United States Patent and Trademark Office website, where you can see every trademark and patent that's ever been applied for, basically, there is a trademark application that was filed on December 19th, 2023, so about 10 months ago, for the word explore, spelled X P-L-O-R-E. So no E at the beginning, just the letter X and then Plore, P-L-O-R-E. And this trademark was filed for by Johnson Outdoors Marine Electronics Incorporated, which is the parent company that owns Humminbird, Minn Kota, Old Town, and more. And in this trademark application, again, all public information here that can be found on the government website for anybody to see at this point, Johnson Outdoors submitted the following. Explore trademark registration is intended to cover the category of sonar depth finders and fish finders, radar apparatus, radios and transceivers, chart plotters, downloadable electronics maps and charts, pre-recorded electronic media featuring maps and charts, echographs and other technical devices and apparatus for fishing and navigation, global positioning systems, GPS navigation device, ultrasonic marine depth sounders, two-way radio apparatus, navigation apparatus for boats, autopilots in the nature of electronic automatic controls for adjusting, steering, and keeping course, compasses, marine navigation software, apparatus for recording, transmitting, or reproduction of sounds or images, data processing equipment and computers, electrical transducers, sensors for determining temperature, speeds, position, and distances, mounting hardware for monitors, batteries and battery chargers, electrical switches, electric cables, wires, conductors, and connection fittings therefore, protective covers and cases for aforesaid goods. So that was a lot. What does that mean? Well, it means if we take a look at the market right now, you can kind of see what's about to happen. And what you want to look for right now is what's on sale, what's trying to be moved quickly. And a quick Google search right now will show you that places like Scheels have Humminbird Helix units at some pretty big discounts right now. That's not a random thing. When you see discounts like that across the board over multiple units and sizes, especially when you're not around any sort of holiday sale time frame, that usually means they're trying to get rid of old stock to make room for a new product. So again, all public information here, but Helixes are on sale, and the same company has filed a trademark application for the name Explore, whose description on the USPTO website seriously implies that a new line of units is going to take over here pretty soon. So I know that is not like all of the info, obviously, but that gives you a little teaser, and you guys can probably make your own inferences at what's about to come, especially wink, wink, nod, nod if you go digging on the internet a little bit right now. Okay, everybody, next thing we have here on today's episode, we're going to talk about something that, if I'm being honest, may not apply to everybody that's listening to this, and I get that. This might be one of those things that's just not for everybody that listens to this show, but for the people that it does apply to, I hope this is going to be really beneficial. So today, I'm going to give you a completely middle-of-the-road, no BS review on the Newport NK180 kayak motor system, including the good, the bad, and the ugly of it. And I know a lot of you are like me, where you've kind of followed the timeline and the trajectory of this show over the years, and you've sort of grown as anglers with me as we've kind of been on this sort of tackle talk journey, which means that so many of you have got into fishing heavily in the past, 4 or 5 years. Then you jumped into a fishing kayak, you bought your first kayak, you loved it, you started upgrading, and then there comes a time in every kayak angler's journey where that 5-letter word creeps into your head: motor, right? Do you add a motor to your kayak? And I think the answer to that question is probably a little different for everyone. For instance, if you mostly fish small bodies of water that are like of the lake or pond variety, then I might argue the answer would be no, because in that instance, paddling or at most pedaling will do you just fine. In fact, in a pond or lake situation where simply holding your spot is equally as important as getting to the spot in the first place, pedals can often do a better job of holding your spot in a particular area and fighting the wind or things like that better than a motor can. Obviously, unless you go down the whole like bow mount, front mounted motor with spot lock thing, but that was not for me. So when I finally went on this journey to find a motor that was the right fit for me, I knew one thing. I knew that I wanted it mounted at the back of my kayak. And the reason that I wanted that was twofold. First, very simply, specifically, I wanted to be able to steer with foot controls. I didn't want a remote. I didn't want to have to do things with my hands a whole bunch, so that I could use that kayak motor basically hands-free. And the other reason I wanted a rear-mounted motor was because I wanted to be able to hit things without breaking that motor. Because around here, we fish a lot of shallow, fast-moving water. There's a lot of obstacles in the water, and a front-mounted trolling motor in your kayak is not going to be a good fit at all. I need a motor where I can pull it up in a second's notice easily, or heaven forbid, if I don't get it up, it can hit things without breaking. And with a rear-mounted kayak motor, if you hit something, that motor simply pops up. It kind of acts like a breakaway motor, and it lifts behind your kayak, obviously goes over the obstacle, then falls right back down into the water. So hitting something is not detrimental to your motor with a rear-mounted motor as much as it would be if you had a front-mounted motor like a Minn Kota or something on the front of your kayak. So I knew that I wanted a rear-mounted option. And then at the time on the market, there were three main options. You had Bixby, you had Torqeedo, and you had Newport. And I tried the Bixby because that was the one that was most appealing to me at the beginning. And after talking to Human, we actually had Human on the show maybe 2 years ago, something like that. A really nice guy. And the Bixby is a very cool motor for certain situations. The Bixby is great because it's lightweight, and it's probably the easiest motor in the world to install on a kayak. It's basically plug and play with no wiring, no running of lines. You just screw the bracket into your kayak and you get out on the water and start fishing. It is like the most painless setup you could ever have. But the negatives of the Bixby for me were that it just wasn't powerful enough to handle what I needed it to handle. On a lake or on a pond, it was great, but in a fast-moving river, it just couldn't handle what I was going to put it through day in and day out. It wasn't fast enough. I couldn't maneuver that kayak efficiently enough as I needed to, especially in super heavy current. It just was overpowered with a lot of the situations I was putting it in. So Bixby, awesome product, great folks, a great fit for a lot of people. It just wasn't a fit for me personally. So then I considered the Torqeedo, and the Torqeedo at the time was arguably the top dog of all kayak motors. Everybody and their brother had a Torqeedo. Everybody that was doing anything remotely competitive had a Torqeedo on it, but the only problem with a Torqeedo was that you had to use their built-in battery. There was no option for battery customization at all. If you wanted a bigger or smaller battery, lightweight, heavier, you were at the mercy of their battery. And that was silly to me because not all kayak anglers are created equal. Some anglers are going to go out and need that motor to last them days, and they're going out on, giant lakes, or they're going upstream 10 miles in heavy current, and you need a ton of power. Other folks might just be going out for 2-3 hours at a time at their local pond, and they don't need that sort of power out of their battery. So then they'd be lugging around a way bigger battery than they're ever going to need. It's more expensive, it's heavier, it's just a big pain that they don't need to deal with because they just need a small battery to go for a couple hours at a time. So that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I wanted that customization of a battery. I also wanted to be able to use a battery I trust, like Dakota Lithium, and didn't really want to trust some sort of pre-made battery that came with this motor. Now, in Torqeedo's case, I believe they have two batteries you can choose from. I think they have the normal one and a slightly larger one, but either way, it makes way more sense to me to be able to wire up the battery that's the best fit for me as a kayak angler in my specific situation. So that left me with the Newport. So I logged onto the Newport website, I put the NK180 in my cart, I paid $999 for it, just like everybody else, and I checked out. And I'll start with this. Since that day, that was the best $999 I have spent as an angler, and I sincerely mean that. I would argue that the kayak itself was obviously the best money that I ever spent in the first place. Getting into a kayak was the best thing I ever did, but since that day, since I bought this motor, I got a different truck that better fits my needs, I've got different rods, different reels, different electronics, different waders, cold gear, you name it, but that $999 has allowed me to go more places and catch more fish than anything else that I've purchased. So I'm obviously going to start here with the good. And I hate the term game changer. I hate the hyperbole that exists in fishing and reviews and social media and YouTube, and everything has to be like, the most ridiculous exclamation you can have. This is the best blah, blah, blah ever. You won't believe. It's like everything is just over the top. But if I had to call one thing that I've purchased over the past year or two a quote-unquote game changer, it's a kayak motor, and specifically this model, the NK180 that I bought. I can now put my kayak in the river and motor upstream like 3 to 4 mile an hour most days, and that would have normally taken me hours and hours of pedaling and paddling and portaging and frustration just to even get there in the past. And now I can put that part aside and I can get to where I want, get to where I need to get to, and spend more time fishing. It's also allowed me to go more alone when I used to have to rely on, friends to do a float with to reach certain spots. Now, say I only have an hour or 2 hours, I can still go. It doesn't always have to be this 12-hour ordeal. Don't get me wrong, I love those full days with my buddies where we go out and fish, but schedules don't align sometimes. Everybody has their work schedule and stuff, and not every day can be this really pretty 12, 13-hour float. Sometimes you only got 2 hours after work before it gets dark or things like that. I can actually go by myself and still hit some of these spots that I could just never get to before without friends' help. Now, the third thing I'll say here is that it allows us to hold our spot in heavy and sometimes even maybe potentially dangerous current and fish those areas that fish are in. You just could never stay there long enough before to fish it effectively. Before, you might have 1 or 2 casts before you were taken completely downstream from that juicy current seam or tree or whatever. But now I can point my kayak upstream. I can set my motor to the same speed as the current and use my feet to keep my kayak straight. And essentially now I have this sort of hands-free spot lock right there in the current. And that has been awesome to actually utilize versus having to use like an anchor yourself in the current, get yourself in sketchy situations when you're trying to dislodge your anchor in that heavy a current. And it just creates problems that you just don't want to deal with. You could put yourself in dangerous situations, flip your kayak with those type of really grippy anchors that you need in that type of current. The same thing can be said for like a lake with wind, right? Now I can set my motor at a very low speed, face into the wind, and now I'm no longer getting blown off that point or that ledge or whatever I'm trying to fish. I can stay right there all day with no effort. And again, focus on the fishing part. So that's obviously the overall number one positive for me about a motor in general, is it's letting me focus more on the actual fishing. Now, with this specific motor, the NK180, some other positives have been that one, you can use your own battery, obviously. So you get a simple 24-volt connection that allows you to use any 24-volt battery you want. You can use lead, you can use lithium, cheap, expensive, it doesn't matter. 24 volts and you're good to go. So for me, I run the Dakota Lithium 24-volt 60-amp-hour battery, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that that battery can run all day long at my normal usage, like 12 hours a day, and I've done that for 3 days in a row without charging this battery. In fact, I've never actually killed this battery before, so I'm not 100% sure how long it'll last me if I really needed it to, but I usually go 1 to 2 full days before I even think about charging this thing, and I really don't know if I would physically be able to kill this battery in 1 day, no matter how hard I ran it while fishing. This battery is an absolute stud, and again, it takes that part and that worry out of the equation for me. But I love it because I was able to use the battery that I want. I didn't want to have to worry about that. I wanted a good battery that all day long, I did not have to look at my voltage. I didn't have to look at my battery power and worry about conserving anything. I wanted to go just sort of full bore as much as I wanted because I've seen the opposite side of this. My buddy Ryan had a Torpedo for a long time, and we would go out, and while I had this battery and this motor and he had the Torpedo, he would have to constantly watch his usage and be like, oh, I'm at 46%, now I'm at 42%, now I'm at 40%. I hope I'm going to have enough battery to get back to the ramp and get out. I didn't have to worry about that. So that was one thing that I knew from the get-go that I wanted out of a motor, was to make sure that I could use the battery I wanted. So that's been great for me, but maybe you're only going out 3 to 4 hours a day on average and you have the ability to charge that battery every night, then you do not not need a 60 amp hour battery. You can go much smaller, much cheaper, much lighter, and you don't have to worry about it. That's the beauty of obviously getting the choice to use your own battery. So that was a plus to me. The next thing for me was the ability to quickly take this motor off of my kayak for transportation. And this is where we, I guess, probably start to talk about some of the differences between the NK180, which is the old model that I actually bought, and the new NK180 Pro, which is the model that they now sell because they've done away with the original NK180 and they've improved it a little bit. So on my old NK180, you have that mounting bracket that screws onto your kayak, which is great. That stays permanent on your kayak no matter what. And then when you want to attach this motor, you have to drop the motor into the bracket, line up this little axle thing, and then use the built-in quick release clamp and clamp it tight in place, and boom, you're done. Now, that was very convenient because everything was all in one piece. You couldn't lose anything, and unclamping it was a breeze. Taking this motor off took literally like half a second, and boom, you can throw it in your truck. The problem was putting it on. The old NK180, again, not the one they sell now, the NK180 Pro, this is the old NK180, the one with like the yellow prop that you'll see if you haven't bought one in the past like year or so, then this is the model that you probably have or you've seen, is the old NK180. There was this inner metal tube that you had to line up perfectly with that bracket and keep it inside this plastic housing, keep it from sliding one way or the other when you dropped it down. And inevitably, you would loosen that axle to drop it down in the bracket. That inner tube would kind of move to the right or to the left, even like a freaking millimeter. And boom, now you can't drop that motor in the bracket because it doesn't fit perfectly. You have to take it out and start all over again. And it was just a pain to get that motor to drop in there cleanly. I don't really know how to explain it, but if you are listening to this and you've ever had an NK180 or you've ever seen someone try and use an NK180, you know exactly what I'm talking about, and you know it's the most frustrating thing in the world. Your fingers didn't fit very well in there to slide it back in place. You'd take it out, fix it, drop it back in, and it would happen again. And there were a lot of curse words that were said when you're trying to get your motor in that bracket, especially in like early morning or in dark situations. So now they have the NK180 Pro, which is what I have now, and we'll talk about why that's the one I have now here in a few minutes. But the new version of the NK180 Pro did away with that clamp system and that inner tube that was really a pain to try and get to go through. And now it's this fully removable axle that you have to take out of the motor bracket and line up perfectly in the holes and slide it all the way through and then screw the cap on the other side. Very easy, except lining up that whole thing with, I guess there would probably be 3 or 4 different holes you have to line up, is a pain in the you-know-what, because you can never seemingly get that to line up perfectly. And if you get down there to eye level to try and see it and see the light through the other side to make sure it's lined up through perfectly, you'd be like in the water. So again, borderline impossible to get done on the first try in full daylight, let alone when you're trying to do this like in the dark or something. Still a very frustrating way to put this motor on the back of that kayak. They should have kept the original quick release, but just made sure that metal tube that kept poking out one side or the other was secured inside the housing. That's all they had to do, and there would be absolutely no issues with getting this motor on and off. It would have been a really simple fix, but instead, they redid it completely with another frustration point for anglers that take their motor off and on to transport every time. So, a positive, the motor comes off so that you can transport it safely. You're not worrying about it being on the back of your kayak, on the back of your truck, and bouncing up and down and cracking your kayak hull or, falling off or something like that. It comes off, that's great, but the negatives, both systems that they've used at one point or another in the 2 iterations of this motor come with a fair level of frustration attached. Now, some other nice features about this motor, it has a kill switch magnet that's great, and you should attach that to yourself in case you fall off of the kayak. That means the motor stops going and you don't have a runaway kayak. But I think most other people, honestly, just attach it to the kayak so that we don't lose it. Again, a good idea nonetheless, but I feel like a lot of us don't use it the way that it was intended to be used. The other thing, it does have a nice throttle system that you mount on the track mount of your kayak to either your right or left side in front of you, and it goes forward and reverse, which is nice. Now, it does have a percentage meter on that throttle that will let you see how much throttle you're using at any given time. So it goes 0% to 100%. It also has a voltage meter on there. It has a battery bar, and it tells you how many watts you're using at any given time when your motor is engaged. Now, the negative is that on the Torqeedo, like the name brand version of this, it actually tells you how many miles you have left at your current speed. The Newport does not do that. The Newport throttle display leaves you a lot more in the dark in terms of how much life you have left in your battery. The battery indicator on the old NK180, I feel like was fairly accurate, but on this new NK180 Pro, it's not even close. I will fully charge that 60 amp hour battery, plug it in, and within 30 seconds, it will drop down to 4 out of 5 bars, which is not true. That battery has 5 of 5 bars. That battery will last me 4 days of hard use at that point. It is not at 80% battery at that point. And then after an hour or so, it'll drop to like 3 out of 5 bars. Again, not even close to accurate. I've probably got 96, 97% battery left at that point, and the battery indicator on the NK180 Pro throttle is telling me that I have like 60%. So my advice would simply be, don't pay attention at all to the battery indicator on the NK180 Pro, because at least for me, it's not accurate at all. Instead, I would look at your voltage. If your voltage is good, your battery is good. That's the one thing that when it starts dropping, now you're starting to deplete your battery for a lithium battery, and you do need to kind of consider how much it's dropping and when you need to charge your battery. Also, on the old NK180, the throttle was very jumpy, meaning that there were like certain pockets of change that actually made a difference in speed, but that was about it. So if I set my throttle anywhere between like 0 and 6% on the old version, it didn't move. It was just 0. There was no spinning of the prop, no power to the motor. 0 to 6% was still 0%. Then when you got from like 6% to, I don't know, maybe like 10 or 11%, that was all the same speed. Those 5 or 6% in that pocket didn't make a difference. I could put it on 8%, I could put it on 10%, 6%. It was going to be the same speed no matter what. And then you could push it up a little bit, and there'd be a pocket from like 12 to 18 or 20% or something that would all be the same speed, stuff like that. So my actual numbers of those pockets might be a little off, but you get the point, right? There weren't 100 different speeds of this thing. There were probably 10 to 15 speed pockets on that 100% throttle. So like 80% to 100% were the same speed no matter what. So it was just really odd. Now, to their credit, on this new NK180 Pro, they've fixed that issue. It's a lot more smoother of a transition from 0% to 100% and all the way through that throttle profile. So they did a really good job of addressing that issue. Now, the other thing that this NK180 and NK180 Pro both come with is the option for foot steering. So it will come with like a little steering triangle that you attach to the shaft of the motor, and then you can run cables inside or outside, however your kayak is set up, to attach to like foot steering controls that you install toward the front of your kayak. So I think they were called Select foot steering controls, but there's a whole bunch of different cheap options out there. I think I paid like $30 or something for my foot steering controls that I actually mounted to the front of my kayak where my feet go, and then you just run the cables and it will turn that motor to the right or to the left. Very simply done. So steering with your feet is great. It just depends on what kayak you have that's going to determine how easy or hard that foot steering is going to be to rig up. So on my Hobie Outback, it was, I would say, quite challenging. But on other kayaks, it's very easy to rig up foot steering. They're a lot more foot steering friendly. Some of them already have the lines drilled that you feed the foot steering cables through your hull in, all that kind of stuff. It just depends on what type of kayak you have. Now, one of the things that I wanted to make sure I did right off the bat with these motors when I bought them was put a rock guard of some sort on these motors. Now, this is where we start to run into a lot of issues because I need a rock guard. I'm constantly hitting things like rocks or the bottom at full speed as I'm trying to navigate this heavy current, and it just happens. There's no stopping it. You can try your best to try and pull that motor up. It's not going to help. You're going to blast things like every 5 or 10 minutes. It just happens. And in those cases, the breakaway nature of that motor just isn't enough. I would crack that motor open probably within the first 2 or 3 trips of the way that I fish if I didn't have some sort of rock guard on it. So there was this company, and still is this company, called Innovative Sportsman that makes rock guards for Torqeedos and Newports. Now, the problem is they've stopped making all the rock guards for the smaller Torqeedo, which is what fits the NK180, because the NK180 is basically a direct copy of the small Torqeedo 403. So back in the day, I bought the rock guard that they made for the smallest Torqeedo, that 403, and then I modified it to fit my NK180. The NK180, like I said, is basically a direct knockoff of the Torqeedo 403, minus the battery situation, obviously. So I figured it would fit, and it was very, very close. But I did have to bend that rock guard quite a bit and sort of manhandle it to try and figure out how to get it around the housing. It just wasn't quite the exact same shape as the Torqeedo, but it was very close. So by the time, after, I don't know, like 30, 40, 50 minutes of just sweating my tail off out in the summer and trying to bend this thing around my motor, I finally got it, and now I do have this protective housing around my Newport that I needed. So I eventually got it. That was great. But then, fast forward, an Innovative Sportsman stops making the rock guards for the Torqeedo 403, which is what I used. And they said it was because no one was really buying the Torqeedo 403s anymore. Everybody was buying the Torqeedo 1103, which is what the NK300 from Newport is modeled after. It's a bigger motor. It's heavier. It's just like I think it's like 3 horsepower or something. It's just overkill for what I would need. And then the kicker, the NK300 uses a 36-volt battery, which again, I don't want to deal with. A lot bigger battery, a lot more expensive, probably heavier. They don't make a lot of little ones. I didn't want to deal with that. So that was out of the question, the NK300. I am not putting an NK300 on the back of my Hobie Outback. I do not need that. And those rock guards that they make for the NK300 or the, Torqeedo 1103 do not fit the NK180 or the NK180 Pro. The shaft size and especially the shaft shape is very different on those two types of motors. So it just doesn't work. And that was very frustrating. So I actually went to iCast. I talked to the president of Newport Vessels, and I told him, I said, the one thing that you guys need to make is a rock guard for the NK180 and 180 Pro. You would sell a ton of them because the only people that made them don't make them anymore. And it's one of the first things people say when they see my kayak setup and they see I have an NK180 or now a 180 Pro. They say, where'd you get that rock guard? And you have to kind of like let them down a little bit and say, well, there was a company that kind of made one that you could sort of, retrofit to fit this, and now nobody makes them anymore. So if you're listening to this, if you are like a metal fabrication place or something, make a rock guard for the NK180 Pro. I guarantee you'll be making some money. But for right now, until somebody does that, if you want a rock guard for this NK180 or 180 Pro, you have to find someone that has the old Innovative Sportsman Torqeedo 403 rock guard. That's the one that will fit it. The others, the one that Innovative Sportsman sells right now and the ones they make currently, do not work. So unless you're going to do a ton of modifying to one of those, which again, I don't even know you could do, it's just not going to work. So if you find one of the old rock guards, you're in luck, but that was the very first thing I did. Now, the good news is most of you that are listening to this probably fish water that is like at least 1.5 feet deep or deeper, so you don't really have to worry about a rock guard too much, especially if you're a lake or a pond or even just like not a super duper, whitewater rapid river person. You don't really need a rock guard. You'll be fine. But the way that we fish, we did need one. These heavy current river rat folks like us, that was just something I felt much more comfortable having on my motor versus not having on it. But then this leads to a lot of major frustrations with the NK180 Pro specifically when I wanted to add that rock guard. So if for some reason you buy an NK180 Pro, you have one of the old rock guards that fit on the NK180 and that old Torqeedo, it is not going to fit on that NK180 Pro. And this was probably one of the biggest frustration points that I had installing this new NK180 Pro. When I went to add that rock guard, you obviously normally have to feed the entire wiring system through this rock guard because it's all one piece. It's just like a hollow middle that you feed everything through and then slide onto the shaft of that motor, and it falls all the way down to where the motor is, and that's it. So you have to feed everything through. And it worked on the NK180. The NK180 was great. Everything comes off really clean and easy. It's really easy to modify and kind of customize that motor. But with this new NK180 Pro, they changed it so that there's a hard rubber protection piece where the wire is fed through the shaft of the motor, and now there's this blockage that you can't get anything around. It doesn't come off. It's meant to be permanent there. So now you can't slide anything onto or off of the shaft of the motor without breaking it. It's all stuck and it's all permanent. So long story short here, I don't think they really thought through what people want to do with this motor. They didn't consult enough people, obviously, before making this change, because they created this unnecessary obstacle at the top of the motor shaft that serves really no purpose, and there's no reason for it being there, but now it keeps you from being able to put anything on or take anything off. The old one let you do it. The NK180 Pro does not. So that was a big miss for me. I wanted to add a rock guard on it. Now I couldn't. I also wanted to adjust the motor height on this with the ring clip that actually comes on it, but it comes installed below the motor mount, so it doesn't do anything seemingly. It just kind of sits there. I don't really understand the point of this little clip. I want it above the motor mount piece so that I can adjust how shallow or how deep that motor is running. Again, seemed really silly to me there too that I couldn't really adjust the motor height without adding something to it and seemingly reversing where that piece already came on that shaft. It just came in the wrong spot. So as I was trying to customize this and do some work on it, I've never been so frustrated in my life with a company that added things that seemingly tried to be upgrades or tried to be positive things, but just did the polar opposite and added unnecessary obstacles and roadblocks to any sort of customization of this motor. So maybe too much information here, but I really feel like that was a miss, to the point I had to take a big metal file like out of my garage that you use to file other things, and I had to file off probably half to an inch of hard plastic rubber off of the top of this motor to free up the shaft for access to put things on and off of. So the rubber was supposed to stay there permanent forever to protect the wiring, I guess, but I had to basically ruin it to try and access the motor shaft to rearrange the poor placement of the motor height clip and to install a rock guard on it. Again, big miss for me from Newport. But my final grievance with the NK180 Pro is that they added some quick connects to the wiring system between the battery and the motor, which is an awesome touch. I'm really glad they did it. That was thoughtful, but they put them in the wrong place. They put the quick connect right at the motor, not at the battery. So now you've got 10 feet or so of wiring that you want that wiring to be permanently attached to your motor, not the battery. You want your battery to disconnect with as little wiring on it as possible, so you're not carrying around a battery with 10 feet of 8-gauge wire attached to it at all times. You want that wiring to be a part of the motor system, not the battery. So that was annoying and caused me obviously to cut all of the wires completely, resplice them, rewire this whole thing so that the majority of wiring was permanently attached to the motor. So now when you disconnect, that motor and the wiring and the throttle, that all is in one bundle. That's how it should be. So there was that. I also guess I lied because there's one final little irk that I want to talk about with the new NK180 Pro, and it's the throttle itself. On the old throttle, on the NK180, it actually had a throttle bar like you would normally see, something you could grab with your hand and push up or down that went all the way across the unit, just like a normal throttle. And it was very easy to grab, easy to use, very convenient. Now the new NK180 Pro throttle just has this little nub that kind of sticks up that you push forward and backward, not nearly as comfortable. And I probably understand, I guess, why they did it. I'm guessing there were people that were getting their straps of their life jacket or something caught on that throttle bar, so they made it very minimalistic to try and reduce that. But from a utility standpoint, it's objectively worse. It probably prevents accidents, but it's not as pleasant to handle as the old throttle was. But for all of my frustrations with the changes that they made to the NK180 Pro, there were a few good ones too. They added a slightly bigger prop, which was nice to see. We mentioned the improved throttle function. They did a great job with that. It's equally as quiet, if not quieter. They're very quiet, especially compared to most of the other kayak motors on the market. They definitely win in that category. It did have those quick connects on it, even though they were in a terrible location. A great effort, I guess, by Newport. And then Newport themselves advertised this new model as 16% faster, 25% quieter, and having a 25% increased range and efficiency. And I can say that I probably haven't seen too much of a speed difference, even though I'm sure there is, because I'm sure they tested it. But I can notice a little bit of noise reduction, even though the old one was very quiet, especially compared to like an old Torqeedo or something. These things are way better. They're brushless, very quiet, stealthy, good kayak motors. And then I can't really comment, I guess, on the range increase because I've never actually run out of battery in the first place to get kind of a baseline of where the old one was and where the new one is. All right, everybody, we'll get back to the episode here in just a second, but first we are brought to you in part by Dakota Lithium batteries. And this is perfect because in this episode, we are talking about a kayak motor, which obviously needs a battery to run it. So there would be no review of this motor at all without a great battery behind it, powering it, and letting us put it to the test. That battery that I trust time and time again is Dakota Lithium. This specific one is a 24-volt, 60-amp-hour Dakota Lithium battery. That is for sure my recommendation if you are going to be purchasing something like the Newport we're talking about today. I can run multiple days pushing it as hard as I want and not kill this battery. You don't have to worry about conserving it over the entire day like some other batteries. This will get you through a full day of hard fishing, no questions asked. But as always with Dakota Lithium in general, they are twice the power of traditional batteries at half the weight. They charge up to 5 times faster. They last up to 4 times longer. They have a 100% US-based customer support system, and they come with a whopping 11-year warranty. And if you want to buy one, we're here to save you money. You can use code TACKLETALK5. TACKLETALK, the number 5, no spaces. Enter that at checkout. That's going to save you 5% off your entire battery purchase, and it's going to let Dakota Lithium know that you heard about them from the Tackle Talk podcast. It helps us. It helps you. It's a win-win. So be sure to use code TACKLETALK5 over at www.dakotalithium.com, the official lithium battery of Bassmaster. And then the last thing I want to comment on here really fast is their customer service. And I'm going to be real with you guys for a moment. I'm not going to sugarcoat this, but I've heard nothing but great things about Newport's customer service team. But my one interaction with them, it wasn't terrible. It just wasn't what I hoped it would be. So long story short, after about a year of that original NK180, my motor just straight up broke one day. I don't know how or why it happened. I was on the water and it just died. And then when I went to fire it back up, it would like seize a little bit and it would give me one of the 6 possible error codes with no rhyme or reason as to which one it flashed or in what order they were flashing. Usually it flashes 1 or 2 of them and it actually indicates what's wrong with the motor. Mine was giving me like all 6 in random orders. There was nothing I could do to fix this thing. It was just acting like it was actually fried. So I tried everything, the battery, wiring, resetting the throttle, letting it sit for a couple days and retrying it, everything, right? And nothing worked. It was just, I don't know, like I said, I guess fried beyond repair. So I called Newport's customer service line, actually called them on the phone. A very nice lady named Autumn answered my call, was very personable, very polite, and she told me that I'd have to go online and fill out the warranty claim there. Okay, fair enough, right? I would have rather just been able to handle it over the phone, but I get it. It's their system, their way of doing things. Cool. She also said that the lady that normally does the warranties was on vacation, but the owner of the company was handling them in her absence, and I should hear back in like a day or two, and he was getting them done very, very quickly. Awesome. Great. So I go online, I fill it out, fill out the warranty claim, I attach every photo and video they ask for, everything that I had to try and accurately show them and describe the problems to the best of my ability. And I also mentioned, hey, I'm in like a week and a half going on an out-of-state trip, and I need an update, so I need to know what to do, right? Do I need to buy a new one? Am I going to get a warranty replacement? Am I going to get parts to fix it? What do I need to do to fix it? Whatever. And she said, that's no problem. Put it in the message. We'll take that into consideration. We'll get this taken care of very quickly. So to save you guys a lot of time in this story, I'm going to fast forward. I called probably 3 or 4 times over the next week and a half to check in. Still no status update from them. Other Instagram DMs, they DM'd me. I DM'd them back because they saw a story I put up where I was kind of frustrated. They were checking into it. Nothing on that end either. I even had a buddy of mine that works with Newport contact them on my behalf. I didn't ask him to do it, but he did it. I wish he kind of wouldn't, so that I would have seen how long it actually would have taken for someone just normally to get this taken care of. But finally, after like 11 or 12 days, I got a response, and all it said was that one of my original pictures in the submission was wrong and I needed to retake it. That was after 11 or 12 days of me calling back in religiously, checking in, people reaching out to them, telling them that they need to get this taken care of, all kinds of stuff. I'm just looking for an answer, right? I'm not expecting a new motor to be sent to me fast or anything. I'm just looking for what do I need to do. I have an event coming up. I need my motor, so if I need to sack up and buy a new one and it's not covered, great, I'll do that. If you tell me how to fix it, I'll fix it. I just need an answer, and it went on like almost 2 weeks with no answer or status update at all. So at that point, I got a little frustrated, obviously, and after multiple check-ins, I wrote back very politely, but it was a disappointed email. I was disappointed this process was taking like 2 weeks. I still didn't even have a single answer as to what direction this was going to go or whatever the problem was, anything like that. Just being in the unknown for like almost 2 weeks from a company that is usually pretty responsive and helpful. It just seemed a little bit out of the ordinary to me. But to their credit, they finally got it figured out. They sent a replacement NK180 Pro since they don't make the NK180 anymore that I had before, and they sent it to cover the warranty. And that was an awesome move, very appreciative. It got me back on the water, and it also gave me a chance to see the differences that we talked about today between the NK180 and the NK180 Pro. So aside from the frustration, I guess, of the timeliness of the fix, because to me, again, customer service costs $0. It costs $0 to respond to an email, to respond to a call, to be able to get someone an answer, at least a status update on something shouldn't take almost 2 weeks to do. You shouldn't keep someone in the dark that long. It should be a smoother process than that. Again, I'm not asking it to be solved that fast, but just keep me in the loop. Tell me the next steps. Tell me what I need to do. Feeling like you're being ignored for a couple weeks is kind of annoying. But again, I want to stress they got it taken care of. I feel confident telling you that they do have good folks there that are working on it, that are trying to take care of you. And hopefully that, couple week delay or whatever of my experience was just an outlier. And then when I did talk to someone, and I mean this, they were extremely nice, real people. That Autumn lady was great. It was refreshing to be able to call, hit 1 for Marine Motors or whatever, and then have a friendly person pick up and at least kind of give you a little bit of sense of security that, like, okay, there are people here that care. Even if, I'm not getting my answer fast, they do have folks that you can call and talk to. So that's something, I guess. But again, I just had a little bit of frustration when you spend $1,000 on a motor that craps out on you after a year, and it takes you a couple weeks to even get an answer from someone. I just got a little impatient. So that was my attempt, hopefully, at a full review of my experience with the NK180 Pro and the old NK180 from Newport. The good with this new NK180 Pro, again, it's the only model you can really buy now, that's the one they're making, is it comes with the ability to use your own battery, so you save money. It gives you increased customization options there. They've fixed that throttle issue to give you a nice, consistent profile through the whole throttle usage all the way from 0 to 100%. It's got a great little screen on that throttle that shows you the voltage and the power information. I didn't even mention also, it now comes with an added quick disconnect for the throttle itself. It used to be that whole thing was just hardwired. There was no way to disconnect it unless you took the back plate off of the throttle, and then they'd try and get you to pay an extra, I don't know what it was, $25, $50 or whatever for a little connector piece. So then you could disconnect the throttle if you want to. They tried to kind of nickel and dime you for that. Now it just comes with it. You can detach that throttle if you want to. The whole motor itself is able to be attached and detached for easy transportation. Performance-wise, it's awesome. I can go like 5 or 6 mile an hour with it wide open with a fully loaded down Hobie Outback. The foot steering option is a huge deal for me. It's kick up, so you have less of a chance of hitting something and ruining that motor. It's quiet and brushless. It's powerful, and it does the job, allowing you to get where you need to go to fish more. Now, the negatives, the new throttle bar is kind of annoying, right? And the shape of it is a little silly. The battery meter on mine, at least, is almost always wrong, so I just don't pay attention to it at all. I wanted to strangle whoever the genius was that added the thick plastic hex protection above the shaft to prevent any sort of customization of this thing and the ability to take pieces on and off of it, like a rock guard, for instance. The quick connect wiring was a great idea, but poorly executed, with the quick connect being placed all the way at the back of the motor and leaving all of this wiring attached to your battery permanently. And I had a little hiccup with their customer service, but in the end, they took care of the issue. They made it more than right, which I am extremely thankful for. So again, all of this review and experience and everything is without them knowing who I am at all or who Tackle Talk is at all. This is just as a completely anonymous paying customer that found their product to be the best fit for my specific needs as a kayak angler that frequently finds themselves in shallow, heavy current and unique situations. So, is it worth it? Yes, it's worth it. Very much so. If my garage caught on fire today, knock on wood, and all it did was burn away all of my fishing gear, the first purchases that I would make would be a new kayak, a Dakota Lithium, and a new NK180 Pro. So, take that for what you will. I realize that not everybody is in this boat. Not everybody has a kayak or wants a motor on that kayak. But for those that do, I would strongly consider going this route. And obviously, I don't work with Newport, as you can tell by listening to this review, right? It was probably a little bit more truthful or negative than most people would be if they worked with Newport. But in the end, if you do want to purchase one of these, try and send me a DM at Tackle Talk Podcast on Instagram, and I'll see if I can round up a coupon code for you. I have some buddies that work with them. I'm guarantee I can find some sort of deal to save you money if you're going to buy one of these. Do not pay full retail price. Shoot me a DM. I guarantee I have a buddy that can help you get a discount on one of these. So shoot me a DM at Tackle Talk Podcast. You guys know we're all about saving money here. I will try and save you money any way that I can. Before you buy one, do not pay full price. Let me know. I can certainly help you out. Okay, everybody, I know we're running a little over here today, so before we go, let's pop into one good question here in the mailbag, powered by Dakota Lithium.
This is the Tackle Talk Podcast mailbag, powered by Dakota Lithium Batteries. Adventure awaits at dakotalithium.com.
All right, the question here is from Sean, and he says, Andrew, I saw you finally made it to the Susquehanna. Blessed to have it in my backyard. Next time you're over this way, hit me up. I'd love to hit the water with you. I noticed from some of your awesome catches that it looked like you were throwing a glide bait. That's a technique that I haven't thrown much and know I'm missing out on. Wanted to know if you could break down how you were using it a bit. What retrieve were you using? I've seen people do a 12, 3, 6, 9, 12 reel movement, but also more of a straight retrieve at times. Do you prefer sinking or floating, or does it matter depending on the situation? I've been throwing mine, an S-Waver or a 6 Sense Trace, and a few other cheaper glides on a heavy, fast Douglas rod, but haven't had much luck. I throw them for a bit, but it always feels a bit awkward. I'm afraid of bomb casting something that heavy because of the big splash when it hits the water, and I give up and I go back to something that I have confidence in. Any tips, or do I just need to lock it in my hands for a few trips? Thanks for any advice you can give. Love the show. Not sure if you remember when I interviewed you back on the Paddle and Fin podcast. I've stepped away from the podcast game for a little bit due to life things happening, but still listening to your show faithfully every Tuesday. Anyway, sorry for the novel. Feel free to condense down if needed. Keep up the great content. Learn so much from your show, Sean. Hey, Sean, hope everything's going well. Yes, of course I remember you. I hope everything's going well. Good to hear from you, man. I didn't realize that you were right over there in Pennsylvania. I should have hit you up if we were over there. But you're right. I was lucky enough to go to the Susquehanna River this past weekend in Pennsylvania, and thoroughly jealous of anybody that has a fishery like that in your backyard. What a beautiful place that place is. And if you want to see some of those catches, you can head over to my personal Instagram page. It's at Haze Fishing, Haze Fishing. You can see a few of those. Just big old fat sassy smallmouths, big shoulders, big guts, gorgeous fish. It was so much fun. I know you guys obviously don't tune in and we don't talk a whole lot about my personal fishing on this show and fish stories and stuff because again, that's not what Tackle Talk is about, and I know that, and I think that's hopefully what makes the show a little different than most other fishing shows. But again, if you do want to go see pictures, they are over on my Instagram. You can go check those out. But yes, to your question, glide baits. And it was, I think, day 2 that we were there, and I was smoking them on a Jackal re-range jerkbait most of the day. And then after about an hour or an hour and a half of a really hot bite on the Jackal re-range, I said to myself, I bet these fish are fired up enough to eat a big glide bait right now. So I put on a 7-inch resin Chad from KGB Swim Baits. I chucked it in the same spot that I just pulled a fish out of a few moments ago, and boom, one flashed on it. I saw the whole thing. It swiped at it. It missed it. And I got a little too excited, right? I finally gained my composure again, kept working it. And 3 twitches later, she came back and crushed it. And that was that. For the next, probably 2 or 3 hours, there were 3 of us just wearing smallmouth out on 6 to 9 inch glide baits in that stretch of the river. So much fun. It was just heaven on earth. But to the specific questions here, how I was retrieving it. So 2 of the other guys that I was with on that trip, Ryan and Dylan, if you watch them, they retrieve it a lot more, kind of like you say, right? Slow, methodical, sort of like a third jerky turns of the reel, things like that. I don't think I would probably go 12, 3, 6, 9, 12, like you said, because that's a little too small of turns for me. But if I was going to work it like that, I would probably go 12, 4, 8, 12, or maybe even 12, 6, 12, right? Bigger turns of the reel. That's just me. But if you actually watch me work a glide bait, I actually work it a lot closer to a jerk bait than that. I actually like to give that glide the action with my rod even more than my reel. So if you watch me work it, it almost looks like I'm working like a finesse jerk bait more than a glide bait. I don't know why. It's just how I've gotten used to doing it. I like imparting that action with the rod more than the reel. But the time in between those twitches or reels or whatever you're doing is what you really need to worry about. It's just like a jerk bait, right? Sometimes it's faster, sometimes it's painfully slow, and sometimes it's somewhere in the middle. It just depends on the fish. More active fish, warmer water, better conditions, I'm working it faster a lot of times. Finicky fish, milking a certain strike zone or area, or if you just have a really nervous, curious follower, then maybe you slow it down a little bit. Line-wise, I'm usually using 20-pound fluoro. That's my favorite. But like you said, you do just have to lock it in your hands and get used to it. There's also a big difference between the 2 baits that you mentioned. So an S-Waver is a lot more like what we were using, like a single jointed glide bait, walking style glide bait, subsurface. The other thing that you mentioned was the 6 Sense Trace, which is a lot more of like a multi-jointed swim bait. And that is more of like a slow, straight retrieve type bait for me. I'm also a big fan of slow sink glide baits. I think that way you can control where you're at in the water column a little bit better. If it's a floater, well, you're limited to the top of the water column a lot of the times. And if it's a fast sink, you're trying to keep it from getting snagged a lot depending on how shallow you're working it. So a slow sink or a suspending model is pretty perfect for me because I can work it slower and get it down if I need to, or I can work it faster or with the rod tip up to keep it higher up in the water. So kind of the best of both worlds there. But either way, it's a great time right now for you to get out and try one because fish are hungry, they're mean, they're active, and that is a great time to get out and get confidence on any type of technique, especially something like a glide bait. All right, everybody, that is today's episode. Thank you guys so much for listening to the show. As always, the best thing you can do to help us out, go over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leave us a review. That helps a ton on Apple. You can write a review on Spotify. You just tap the little 5-star thing. That helps us out a ton. As always, find us on the web, tackletalkpodcast.com. Find us on social media at Tackle Talk Podcast, and we'll see you right back here next Tuesday for another brand new episode of Tackle Talk.
Thank you for listening to the Tackle Talk Podcast. Tackle Talk is produced by Andrew Hayes. Copyright 2021. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.